Everybody, good evening to many of you. Many of you are we're on multiple coasts this time around for our Jacobson Family Sustainable Impact lecture series on women and minority founders, challenges and strategies for impact investing. I'm Jill Kickle. I'm the acting director of the Birmingham Social Enterprise Lab and happy to have you with us this evening. Tonight's panel discussion will share strategies and also insights from minority entrepreneurs and impact investors to better understand the obstacles and also the opportunities of funding for diverse founders. You may know this stat. In 2022, Black and Latino founders received only 1%, believe it, 1% and 1.5% respectively of total US venture capital funding. Women-founded teams received 1.9%, not much better, of VC funds, and only 0.1% of VC funds went to Black and Latino women founders. It's time to change that, okay? And so I'm going to turn it over to one of our besties in the Birmingham Social Enterprise Lab, our Director of Marketing and Communications, Avni Shah, who will talk a little bit more about the lecture series, as well as introduce our panelists and moderator. Avni, it's off to you.
Thank you so much, Jill. Welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have you, and we're so excited to have our speakers here today. Just a little bit of background on the Jacobson Family Sustainable Impact Lecture Series. It was launched a few years back with the help of the member Libby Jacobson, who is a member of our very first student cohort of the USC Marshall Master of Science in Social Entrepreneurship program, which is housed here at the lab. And it was launched with the aim of fostering knowledge sharing between students, community members, business professionals around strategies to help solve the most pressing social problems across the globe. So every year, with the support of Libby and her family, we host 6 panel discussions to dive deeper into critical and urgent topics in the social impact and business space. This year alone, we've talked about AI and climate change and affordable housing, and we will have 3 more discussions in 2024 in the winter and spring as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our panel. Ciara May is the founder and CEO of Rebundle, which is creating space for Black women in clean beauty with the first US-made plant-based hair extensions brand. Ciara's combined passion for sustainability and understanding of health disparities in personal care products inspired the vision for Rebundle's first product, Braid Better. Ciara is also an MSSE alumna, and we're proud and excited to have her join us here today. And we also have Noah Isserman, who's spent 10 plus years as a professor creating programs, buildings, and teams that support entrepreneurs and startups at universities. This includes iVenture Accelerator at the University of Illinois, which has provided millions of dollars of grant funding to 114 student startups across tech, social, and cultural entrepreneurship. This year, Noah helped launch Honors Fund, where he is the founding advisor. Run by a majority female team, Honors Fund has generated outstanding returns while investing primarily in first-time founders. And last but not least, we have our incredible moderator, Dr. Sara Minard is the founder and CEO of Manarine LLC, an international consulting firm working at the intersection of new economic thinking, social innovation and entrepreneurship, impact and sustainable investing, and systems-level design. As a socioeconomist for the international financial institutions, regional governments, universities, community-based organizations, and companies from West Africa to Appalachia to India, Dr. Minard has 20 plus years of experience working with diverse stakeholders in designing local development strategies and policies for sustainable and ethical private sector investment. So with that, I'll pass it off to you, Dr. Minard, and thank you so much again for everyone for being here.
Avni, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful introduction. It makes me feel like I'm ancient, but I really appreciate it. And Jill, such a pleasure to be here, and just so delighted to be able to facilitate this discussion with two incredible people. So I just want to welcome everyone and just clarify our format for this evening. So it'll be 1 hour. We're going to start with a Q&A discussion with their panelists for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions. So please go ahead and put questions. Any question is a good one. So any questions that you have in the Q&A queue, and we will make this as interactive as possible. Even though we can't see or hear you because it's a webinar, we'll make sure to get to as many questions as we can. So I'd love to start off with you, Ciara, if we could. Rebundle is such an amazing company. We'd love to know a little bit more about your story. So when did you first have the idea to start the company? And maybe just tell us a little bit about your first steps. Like, who are your earliest believers and financial backers? And what's the journey been like for a young entrepreneur to scale a mission, such a beautiful mission, but in a really challenging investment landscape for women of color?
Yeah, that's a lot. I'll go back a little bit further and start with the end of the program at SC. I finished the program in a year because I didn't want to be in school much longer, so I committed to doing the program in a year. And Abby Pfeiffer Mendel asked me what my plans were post grad, and I told her that I thought I'd have a better idea after going through grad school, and I really didn't. And she encouraged me to look into fellowship programs. So then I Googled what a fellowship program was and learned about Venture for America, which is a 2-year postgraduate fellowship. And so I applied for that and got in, and I had to leave Los Angeles because they didn't have any, it wasn't one of their cities. So then I moved east to Charlotte and was teaching entrepreneurship at an HBCU for a short time, and was trying to figure out how to use all the things I learned at both Mizzou, where I went to undergrad, and USC for grad school, and to figure out what kind of idea excited me and that I wanted to pursue with all the new tools I felt I had just gotten from school. And I just started, I really took to the design thinking practice. And so I used that exercise, or that methodology rather, to identify problems in my own life and follow the process to get feedback from other people, and use that as a basis for how I would think about what company I would eventually start. And hair eventually made the list because it was an experience that I was having firsthand while wearing braids post-grad in my first job, and really gravitated toward this idea that I felt was not just important to me, but would be important to other people. And that no matter who I was talking to, they were instantly like excited about this idea, which told me, okay, there's something here. We need to figure out how to turn it into a company. So that's in short what it took for me to go from student to entrepreneurial mindset, and then to turn that into a venture.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's great. We'd love to, we're excited to hear more, but I first want to kick it back over to Noah just to learn a little bit more about your work in the venture space. And you've been working in universities for the past 10 years. What brought you to that work, that sort of intersection between sort of venture creation and universities and investing? What's been the really inspiring part and the rewarding part, and the challenging part, right? Working with students in universities and institutions, which don't necessarily have that, quick, agile, nimble reputation. So love to hear more about that.
Well, one thing, and I'm also very excited to hear more about the company as well next. Yes, I've had the great good fortune to get to hang out and help build things to support people building. And I think that the fundamental core reason why I think universities should be doing this work at all, because I think they're really special institutions, right? Like a place like USC or the University of Illinois, right? Like humanity all in has only made a couple thousand institutions, countries, companies, higher ed, all put together, only a few thousand total ever, where you have that much breadth of talent in one roof or under one, with one email address that's shared. And I think that's just such an amazing opportunity to bring together different kinds of folks with different kinds of expertise and build useful things. So I think that that's like just setting the table, right? It's like, it's a pretty special environment to begin with. And then I would say that, you know, universities are like, entrepreneurship is fundamentally super, super hard, right? And super, super dense in terms of what you have to be learning and shifting to be able to do it. And the more successful you are, the more new problems and new learning you have to have, right? Like you never get to stop learning through this journey. So I think that's why, you know, as a sort of an educator first, I sort of gravitated toward venture as a really wonderful way to just learn. And especially when people, you know, when we're doing things that we care about, solving problems we care about, we're willing to work really hard and be really resourceful and learn a lot in the service of that. So I'd say those are sort of the main reasons. And then with the lens we're talking about today, about sort of underestimated groups in general, you know, I think universities, for all of their challenges, and sure they can be slow sometimes, but they do tend to have a very clear value set and be willing to act on that value set in a way that, say, a lot of investors and impact investors will pay lip service to values, but they won't actually, push comes to shove, back them up. And I think that universities are sort of neat in that they do have a demonstrated and real commitment to supporting diversity in a whole lot of ways. So I think that it's a great place to sort of start fixing some of the pipeline problems you talked about.
Mm. And just a quick follow-up, Noah, do you think in your experience that there's unique opportunities for communities of color? I'm thinking Black, Latino, you know, people of color, that entrepreneurs that really want to follow their dreams and experiment. In your space where you've sat at universities, really being able to sort of open the door to entrepreneurs, what are the biggest challenges for those communities to get access to the things that you offer?
I can't say that I can speak to the greatest challenges necessarily, but what I can certainly say is there are places where we put extra and specific and intentional effort into broadening access, right? That like a lot of the problems come for lots of underrepresented groups of all kinds, from people not feeling like they are invited to spaces and to disciplines and to ways of acting in the world. And so I think, you know, it sort of begins with inclusion and outreach. And then when you talk about the pipeline numbers, right, you know, we're talking about low single-digit percentages for groups that are more than 10 times that in the population, right? That's a big problem. That means, like, you know, and we're failing to create good sort of touchstones and models, right? There's just, you know, if you're a dropout from Harvard who's a white engineer, you're like, okay, well, I can see where this can take me, right? And I think that there's so much talent and there's so many great examples, but they're fewer in certain areas, right? So that's, I think, part of it is just making sure everything is designed to be open to everybody. You know, like we talk about venturing and change making. We don't talk about entrepreneurship very much, because lots of people see themselves as change makers, but not necessarily entrepreneurs till they start thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And Ciara, as an entrepreneur yourself, just love to go back to your story. I mean, I'm sure lots of fits and starts, right? And the design thinking process is so inspiring and invigorating for a lot of folks. Tell us a little bit about how you made that leap between the idea, the support, the design thinking work, really getting your vision, and then actually making that big step of like getting your first check. Share a little bit of that story with us, if you will.
Yeah, at that time, I wasn't going after institutional funding or venture capital. I wasn't familiar enough with it. It was actually more scary than appealing at that time. So I went after what I was familiar with, which was grants. And from the inception of the idea to my first check, there was a lot of writing and talking and trying to figure out what the story was and what the business model would be, what the solution would be. It's basically like a period of like trying to articulate what you're trying to build. So it's months of that, like writing things down, pitching, talking to people, asking for introductions, asking for help. And then I was invited to pitch. I was living in Charlotte at the time. I was invited to pitch to a group that's in economic development fund, and they were the first group to say yes. And I think the check size was like, I think it was like 10K, which seems like nothing now. I wish I had 10K coming in all the time, but I don't even really remember what I did with it. Most of the time in those early days, you blow through that money just to prove or disprove something. And so whatever I was working on at the time was trying to figure out how to make a product, or figure out what the product will be made out of and who I would need to bring that to life. So after crossing that hurdle of getting the first check, then it was a little bit easier to say, we've been supported by this group, and this is feedback we've received. This is what we'll do next. This is what we'll prioritize going forward. Then I did Venture for America's Accelerator that summer. So that was a landing pad, which helped me just figure out like, what is the thing, and took that momentum to eventually launch, and then took that momentum to eventually raise. So there's just a series of steps that you take that they don't happen in a linear fashion. And sometimes it doesn't make sense, but like, you just keep going to solve whatever problem is in front of you, and then you solve that problem, and then something else happens and you focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Has the mission for you been consistent throughout, or have you had moments where you're like, you know what, I think I could add this to it, or I want to make sure that this gets woven in? Has sort of the values and the mission been consistent through the whole time, or have you sort of grown with the idea? I'm just curious.
I would say the product has changed, so the solution itself has evolved, but the mission and the ethos and the why has not changed. If anything, it's just improved and gotten more narrow in scope, or more specific, but it hasn't changed. If I were to look back at some of my past materials for grants or pitch competitions, or I don't know, content, everything would pretty much align with where we are today. It's just matured and been validated with different outlets like customer feedback and support from different groups. But no, I wouldn't say it's changed.
And where are you now in the company's trajectory? And sort of in terms of your narrative to investors, what sort of aspects of the company are you pitching now? Are you in the are you scaling up? Are you innovating with new products? Share with us a little bit about where the company is.
Yeah, we're at a really awkward point. I actually got turned down for an investment today, which sort of dictated what I was going to do the rest of today and really the rest of the year. But we're at a point where we've raised a healthy amount of capital, a very small percentage of founders, Black female founders raise this amount of capital. But I don't often think about how small that piece of the pie is in comparison to everyone else until after the fact. So like, having this discussion now, because that happened, now I'm thinking like, yeah, I didn't get that check, but was it because we didn't deserve it, or we're not in a good spot, or because of all the factors against us? So it's hard to separate the two, but it does happen. Some no's are merited and some no's are not. And I don't know which one this is right now. So we're at a point where we're trying to demonstrate that there's potential to scale, but there are fundamental parts of the business that still have to be proven out. And so we aren't ready to take on a major retailer, but we're ready to go into salons and stores. So it's like, we're at like the late seed, pre-seed plus stage. It's very awkward. It doesn't really make sense. But then again, nobody's stage is the same.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for sharing all that. It's your website is so amazing and so inspiring and beautiful, just aesthetically beautiful. It's really exciting work. No, I'd love for you to put your investor hat on, and give us a little bit of your reflections on, especially what Sarah's just talking about here. Like, how do you think about this as an impact investor? How do you support entrepreneurs like Sara in this kind of tricky stage of their growth? And what are impact investors not doing right? And what are you trying to do better with the Honor Fund?
Nice. Well, I think this is great because I actually have 3 different investor hats that use different logics. And I think, I suspect that many entrepreneurs will interact with lots of different investors who will not even be explicit necessarily with different logics. Like, so as a professor, right? So when we're running an accelerator, we give it an average of 25 grand to 140 odd teams, purely grant-based money, right? So no equity taken, go build your thing, prototype, right? And I loved hearing you talk about how important the first 10K is, because, it feels really good. Like, yeah, so we've been able to take money from donors, channel it to students, the first 10K to 140 odd companies, right? Those companies have gone on to raise hundreds of millions of dollars, literally, and have priced enterprise value of closer to $1 billion than zero right now. And about 20 of them have gone through a seed round, right? So it's actually, we don't really care about the venture side on that, but their success as ventures has actually been quite high, although we really care about individual development. So with that hat on, it's all grants. It's about build the dream, whether it's a nonprofit or a hyper growth capable company, build the dream. So that's what that hat on, right? Then I actually have a true impact investing hat on. That's just a friend who's been a long time charity and social enterprise CEO in the UK. And that's called Social Business Builders. And that's a true impact investment fund, right? Where we're primarily looking to help the world get better by funding social enterprises. And this is one small example there. We're the first check into what's now a thriving bakery that is founded by, run by, owned by, and largely employs people with significant criminal pasts in the UK are called ex-offenders, right? Formerly incarcerated people. And there's a foundation alongside that, puts extra money into full support to help people reintegrate into society, including, but certainly not only, working in HM Pasties, this wonderful bakery, right? So that's like a true impact investing lens. There is no 1000x return in a bakery. It's just like, especially a bakery where you say, oh, look, we'll be just like every other bakery, except we'll spend a bunch of extra money to support our staff. There's no, but in terms of social returns, every day, a non-trivial number of people wake up and they have meaningful work where they're treated well, paid well, and supported into the next stage of their lives, right? So that's a kind of true impact investment there. So that's social business builders. And then the last one, which is the one that I'm sort of most excited about right now because it's the newest, is Honors Fund. Everybody on this call who's affiliated with a university as a student or a recent grad, if you got an idea, come hit us up. So Honors Fund, the core thesis is, so it's a true venture capital fund, right? So we have $25 million to write first checks. The thought is we're going to do 100 checks of $250,000 each into student and university founders. Oh, thank you for dropping the link in chat. And that we have $100 million plus for follow-on. So, the hope is to fund people and then continue to fund them as they keep growing and succeeding, and sort of be the kind of partner that I've seen is really hard for especially underestimated founders to find. And Honors Fund is built around 5 different kinds of underestimated. And the core idea here, this is like a true return-seeking fund, right? Is that underestimated assets are mispriced, right? And it's a very sort of cold and sort of clinical feeling way to say it, right? But if people are systematically underestimating groups, right, by supporting them and being part of their journey, you will outperform those people who are wrong, right? So that's and we're putting a tremendous amount of money behind this thesis, right? And we kind of mean 5 groups. So we say first-time founders in general are underestimated. They will struggle to be supported. Student founders have an additional level of burden. Women, people, communities of color, by which we especially mean underrepresented communities of color, like we're talking about on this call. And then 5th, underestimated places as well. There are lots of places that say aren't in the LA capital market that are, like the Carolinas might be spots where it's kind of harder to get a hold of early stage capital. So those are the 3 different hats with really different ways of looking at companies, and I'm happy to talk more about any one of those as we go on.
Okay, great. That's really exciting. Yes. So I'd love to, Ciara, just come back to you. What would your advice be to kind of early stage investors like Noah and others who want to support women entrepreneurs and other underrepresented investees, companies, about what strategies, what type of support, what type of like capital support do you need to really source your ambitions and scale your impact?
My first thought is, I don't know. But then my second thought is, I've seen the way different investors approach their diligence process that I think can make a difference. It doesn't always mean that the outcome is different, but I have seen how processes are different in my sentiment towards those funds. So I'm not an investor, therefore I only know what I only have I have a limited understanding of what I think is investable versus what an investor is looking for when they're doing their diligence, the numbers that they're crunching, the companies that they're comparing against, like those sort of things. I have less knowledge of that, but I have plenty of knowledge of what I've seen work in my favor to get checks. And the funds that have said yes to us, I find that they spend more time understanding our customer base, our target audience, the product and the problem. And for funds that maybe said no sooner rather than later, I get the impression that they spend less time trying to educate themselves on the space and will default to, I'm unfamiliar with this, it's out of my scope. Therefore, I can't help you because I don't know. And sometimes some funds are just check writers, and I don't actually care for you to know. I just need you to believe enough to say yes to me. But when it is a deal breaker for a VC to say yes or no, whether or not they educate themselves on this specific deal can make a difference in whether or not they see the opportunity and realize the potential.
And just to follow up on that real quickly, when you say educate themselves, what do you think they need to be educated? What part of the story do you feel like they should specifically invest time and energy into to understand more?
I don't know if this is data driven, but I'll just speak from experience. Minority founders and underrepresented founders are more likely to solve a problem that is personal to them or the community that they're a part of. And there are fewer VCs or check writers that will have that same level of understanding. So there's already a disadvantage there. So if you don't know something as a VC and you don't take the time to understand it, then I can't see how you would be able to fairly assess the opportunity, even if your fund is industry agnostic and you don't have one lane of expertise. And then I would also say that there are, like, every fund doesn't have to be focused on a specific community, but having the know-how to evaluate deals, no matter what the problem is, like, I don't know if that process can be made equal, but it needs to be made equal, because the way one company is evaluated and then how another company is evaluated, who's solving very different problems. Maybe they both have some social component, maybe they don't. But if the VC didn't have knowledge of that other space, but was able to imagine it a little bit more, then it's like, why are there certain biases that you don't recognize that allows you to be more creative or more forgiving and graceful versus not maybe approaching it with hesitation or doubt? I don't know the psychology behind it, but I would say that would be a place to start.
I love that. Yeah, thank you so much. Noah, just building off of that, what are some strategies that you use to unpack bias from your investor lens? Whether it's, I mean, there's so many types of bias, so I'll let you choose which ones, but Love to just have a deeper understanding of that from your perspective as an investor.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is to just have real processes, right? So you treat all founders in the same way, and you're asking and trying to understand the same questions, right? Regardless of where they're coming from, what they look like. I think that's kind of table stakes, right? Like if you're not doing that, it's very unclear what you're trying to accomplish at all. I think that maybe one of the next ones, and this is maybe a thing that you've run up against, is sort of that a lot of especially earlier career VCs who will be looking at early stage deals, like pretty insecure people, that like they often haven't done the thing that they're trying to fund often. And that anything you're trying to do, so it's like ignorance is hard for most of us to deal with, right? So I would say that I would guess that the funders you've had good, who don't understand your market immediately and understand its size and complexity right away, like the ones who are kind of comfortable learning and genuinely want to learn, are probably the right people, but yeah, I think it's really hard for an industry that involves a lot of pattern matching, honestly, that, if you're pitching somebody who does black hair care, you walk in the door and they get you right away, right? A B2B SaaS company walking into that funder would probably really struggle, right? They'd have a lot of education to do, like you said. But I think that, just in the current state of VC, it's probably really overweight in some sectors, and probably, and I would strongly guess not yours, for now. And the last thing I would add is that, like, I think that it's the biggest hurdle at the pre-seed and seed stages, right? When it's more about taking a punt on the vision plus the market. Whereas, what I very much hope and wish and suspect will be the case for you, that a couple of years from now, you'll just have great numbers, right? You'll go into the growth round, series A, B, C, D, where it's just about clicking and dragging out the line, right? And that's when, it's more numerical and people are more comfortable. Like there's less ignorance to play on the funder side there. I wish I had a slightly more hopeful message, but I think like that's kind of the honest one right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Ciara, how does that feel? Is that
It's consistent with what I've heard. So that is great. The dryer's going off, sorry. If you think about like how many companies make it to that point though, where we're just talking numbers and numbers truly don't lie. The number of companies that are in those 5 key areas that make it there are fewer and far between because somebody didn't take a chance on them at that awkward stage. So thankfully there are some grants that can help bridge that gap. But then it becomes a matter of how should a founder be spending their time pedaling for 5, 10K grants or going after $500,000 checks.
Mhm. Yeah, and building off of that, Noah, what would be some of the ways that you would suggest entrepreneurs like Ciara and others to really tap into the competition accelerator, venture incubate, I mean, sort of that whole circuit, right, of places where you can actually pitch and get serious checks? What would be the best way to crack into that space? Oh, you're muted.
Good news is that there are ever greater resources specifically devoted to groups that have been historically underestimated. I think that that's one great thing, right? That there are now, certainly tens of millions of dollars, if not more, of, dilution-free grant money flowing to say women founders, right? And the numbers are there for other communities too. I think the question about how to do, actually, I suspect I'll follow up after this to Jill. I'll send some of the resources that we've collected over the years for our own student entrepreneurs, and I'll just send them out. If I was a little more clever, I would have had them ready to drop a link right now. But if that's possible, I'll make sure to get them sent out via Jill to everybody.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Thank you. I know we have some questions in the queue, so as I want to, give our audience a chance to get their voices heard, and then we can come back to some of the questions we didn't get to. We have one question that says, "How can Latinx women get their foot in the door when finding jobs within the VC space? It seems extremely hard, especially since it's a male-dominated industry. So I think it's how can Latinx women get their foot in the door in terms of VC jobs, if I understood correctly. Noah, do you have an answer to that one?
I would say that VC fellowships are like a really increasing space, where say for 2 or 3 months, you'll do 10 hours a week working with a firm and see if you actually like the sort of work that's involved.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a lot of awareness in the space that, the pipeline problem has been terrible, right? That like, if you look to people older than me, they look only like me. And if you look a little younger, it's a little better, and a lot younger, it's a lot better. And so I think that it's sort of a priority for a lot of funds, actually. So I would say that, and then also there are some cool venture scout programs at groups like Dorm Room Fund in particular. And if you start there, you'll rapidly find some other ones. In a couple of years, maybe Honors Fund would be a great place for you to see if you like the industry. Alas, not yet. But we're working on it.
That's awesome. We have another one for you, Ciara. It says, did you work full-time while creating Rebundle?
I did for a period, but for the majority of the life of Rebundle, I did not work full time. I actually left that job at the university when I first started working on it because I didn't want to deal with IP. And then I went to work at a fintech company, but I was only there for 3 months because I wanted to work on Rebundle full time, and then the pandemic started. So I kind of lucked out that there was nothing to spend money on because we couldn't go outside and I didn't have a job.
Yeah, it's amazing what COVID did in terms of innovating our lives. And yeah, it's so that's really interesting though. And so now you're full-time on Rebundle.
I've been full time for 3 years now.
Okay. Wow, that's awesome. We've got one question from someone that says, this is, I think, building off of our conversation earlier. Why do you think an investor doesn't want to learn about the challenges a community faces?
Well, this is one of the reasons I'm very happy to be a part-time investor. Like Sam Altman of OpenAI, whatever you think of him, had an interesting thought. We said, being an angel investor or early stage investor is an absolutely wonderful and life-affirming, very part-time activity, and sort of a soul-sucking and miserable full-time activity. And I think that the reason for that is sort of, if you're supposed to look at 1,000 companies a year, like it's and that's actually a pretty standard number, right? It's much higher for some funds. That's what, 4 or 5 a day that you're looking at, and that's even ones we end up taking calls with. So it's sort of, I think for the average VC, right, it's just a very big pipeline that is feeding them. And the ones that they can understand and say, oh, look, I've supported a team like this in the past. I may have even served on their board. I know I can help a team doing this activity that looks and feels a certain way. It's a pretty natural tendency to kind of pattern match into that. So I think that's one piece. So I think that there's just like, I would say the biggest single piece is just about being quite time poor in the general VC model. I think we're doing it rather differently to that in a way I think is really wiser. But, again, we're a little bit of an edge case.
Yeah, and I would say, as someone who's been teaching impact investing for a while and been in the space as an investor and as an advisor to impact investors, that's, I think, one thing that really distinguishes impact investing from all other types of investing is just this intentionality to actually go out of your way to understand the proximate reality of people that you actually want to put your money to something to change. And I think that's a really important aspect of how I think in general, how investing for social impact has really challenged a lot of the financial industry in general. Just saying that, you know what, it's my capital, but it means that I actually have to go out of my comfort zone and learn something else if I really want to make an impact in a place that that needs capital. So yeah, and there's really wonderful examples of funds that have actually put that as DNA into the fund, right? I'm thinking of RSF Social Finance as a good example of that. But we have another question here. It's like, I think this is definitely for Ciara. It could be for you too, Noah. what was a setback or an experience of failure that really challenged your entrepreneurship and experience as a founder?
Well, there's definitely not just one. I don't know any founder that would have just one. I guess they wouldn't be a founder if they only had one, because they probably would have stopped. But I mean, the most recent one today, I got a no where I was sure I would get a yes. And now I have to figure out how to keep the lights on, how to keep payroll going, how to keep product going out the door with less funds. So it's not necessarily, it's not indicative of failure. It just means I have to prove them wrong and figure out how to get it done anyway.
Mhm. Yeah, I can hear Noah saying, "Yep, that's the resilience of entrepreneurs." And I'm sure you've seen a lot of it. Yeah. Are there other challenges, Noah, that you've seen in your years of all of these entrepreneurs that you've sort of shepherded from idea all the way to, a sort of a Series A round, that you think is just one of these like challenges you're going to see along the way that you have to get through?
I mean, and I'd say like honestly, a couple hundred companies in, like even like shepherd feels like too strong and positive a word, right? It's like we try to help where we can and we make sure that we clap no matter what, right? Like, because it seems like you're having kind of a shitty day or a rough day right now. And that's, and I'm sure you've had 100 rough days before. And if you have the kind of success we all hope you have, right? You'll have another 50 really rough days in the future there. I mean, and I would just say that like weirdly on the entrepreneur side, trying to build an accelerator program was really, really hard to stick to our values of not becoming investors. That major donors, we ended up not, when we desperately needed money and we did not have enough money to fund like even like what we committed to students already. Because people were saying, hey, look, you're going to give money to companies if they grow. You should get some upside of this so they can fund the program in the future. And our thought was like, no, look, like our value is we never want to be on the other side of the table from a student. We're educators, right? Like even over something as small as the valuation of a company, like we never want to have different incentives. And like those were very hard conversations when you desperately need something, and your values and the vision that you have sort of get in the way of that. And it's so those are some of the hard ones along the way for us. They were really bruising and hurt for a long time.
Mm. Yeah. And it's what we have a sort of a deeper question for you, Ciara, here. Why do you do what you do? And how does the answer to that inspire you to keep looking for investment?
That's a good question. I think that your why can change day to day. I'll give you an example. Like your overarching why typically doesn't change. And if it does change, then it might be harder to like keep going, but your day-to-day why may change. I'm going to DC tomorrow to meet a new group of customers to see how well the product resonates in this community. So that's my why for tomorrow. And then my why for next week, we're going to be I'll be in LA. I'm coming to LA for a different event. So my why then would be I want to learn more about how the product performs on shelves in a specific store environment to see if that resonates. So I would say that like your why day to day is definitely going to change, but it usually feeds into the overarching why of the reason you started the company or the reason that you keep going. And I think there's two areas that still excite me that I still see is as an opportunity and it hasn't been cracked yet. There are billions of dollars in the hair extensions industry, and none of it is being done in a sustainable or ethical way. So there's a huge opportunity there for anybody to grab hold of first. And that's going to make a difference on our generation and generations to come, that there's a ton of work that's being done in different areas for sustainability, but there's this specific area that I am uniquely positioned to solve that isn't. So that's exciting. And then on the other side, that is it's less of an excitement and more of like a drive. There are questions about the health implications that those products have on us too. So if I can be a part of that solution, that's also really motivating. And whether or not, let me backtrack a little bit. There's been definitive proof and research that has come out about relaxers and perms, but that research hasn't come out about hair extensions. And we want to be a part of that because we want to be a part of that solution too. So while that is less exciting and more like kind of daunting and a little scary, I'd rather be on the right side of history, which is to be a part of that solution.
That's awesome. And that dovetails into another question we have from the audience, which is, do you consider yourself a social enterprise? And if you do, what are the social impact metrics you want to demonstrate to investors?
I definitely do. After I finished my undergrad, studied business management and got a minor in entrepreneurship. I didn't have a vision for a company that I thought made sense for me based on what I had learned up until that point. And then when I learned about social enterprises, I was like, that's the type of business that I want to start. So with that foundation, every idea I come up with after that, and probably even before that, was a social enterprise. They could not be mutually exclusive in my mind. And so the metrics that I pay attention to are the two whys that I already shared. How many potential lives are we saving? How many people are wearing braids again when they didn't think that they ever would? How many people are having better experiences while wearing braids? And how much waste is being diverted from landfills and contributing to climate change?
Those are pretty powerful metrics right there. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Noah, back to you on the metric side. What type of metrics are you most excited about, particularly from communities of color and entrepreneurs like Ciara? Are there particular metrics that you really are sort of will move the dial for the fund that really you're like, okay, that's, or is it just sort of venture by venture? Help us understand the metric mindset.
I think I'll offer general comment first and then get specific here. So the general one is like, hey, if you're looking for funding from investors in general, but especially impact investors, right? Look at what they've done, not necessarily what they say they do, right? So look at their portfolio companies. Don't look at how they think of themselves. Because one of those is a much stronger proof point, right? And that is I would say that's the first thing I would do as a founder looking at a potential funder. So that's the general point. And I think zooming in, I think funders are often less systematic than they would like to think that they are. And like in my own sort of angel investing stuff, I've invested in 25 companies. And one of my criteria is like, hey, when this company gets 1,000 times bigger, I am absolutely certain that the world is a better place because of that growth, right? And that harm's been mitigated where it can be mitigated, except to competitors, right? That's it. And I've honestly found, right, I almost feel like, I've gone through the tunnel and come back to where I started. We're like, it's pretty obvious when something is a social enterprise in that way. And then you just come into the challenging part of like, are you conceding returns for part of the model? And I'll just say, I'll give a teeny example here, which is like another company we invested in with an impact investing lens. It's a company called Bellevue, also in the UK. They do home care, right? So they, where people go into homes to take care of elderly people or people with disabilities. And that's actually an industry where a lot of harm is done to the carers themselves, right? That it's like very contingent and precarious work. There's a lot of abuse of carers in financial and other ways. So this is a model that takes that and just flips it. So everyone's on a salary, everyone has a high degree of autonomy over their work. So it's a harder business because you're paying people more, but you can attract and keep people more on the flip side. So, the impact piece there is actually about the employees more than anyone else in the equation. And the founders are two brilliant women who are great at sharing that story about how they're changing the world in that way.
Great. So it does sound like your metrics are really specific to the business, to what the problem the business is trying to solve. And if you have any discrepancies with how the founder is measuring their impact, how do you manage that relationship? Is there some sort of deliberative impact management and measurement support you'd give to an investee to help them along the way? Is that part of the philosophy that you have in investing?
I'm really cautious of wasting the time of founders because their job is very, very hard, right? And adding burdens seems to be very, that's the last thing any investor you ever want to work with should ever do, right? So with that like big sort of guideline and to some extent fear, right? It's just like it feels deeply wrong to do that. I think it's more about supporting where we can, right? So if a founder is saying, look, I'm really struggling to figure out, like, I know we're having this impact, but it's really hard to prove. Like, yeah, of course, then we'll roll up our sleeves and get in and help, right? But I think it's, I think impact investors that insist on really deep reporting, unless they are really conceding on financial returns to do that, I would be cautious of working too closely with them, unless it's really like, if you're a carbon recapture company, right? Like, yes, you should have very hard numbers and they should be very proven and they should be collected daily. But for other things, I think it's just much more about supporting entrepreneurs than making sure they're doing it exactly as they initially thought.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think what I was trying to get at is this idea that offering support, right, to entrepreneurs to develop an IMM for their business. I know a lot of CDFIs do that for their loan portfolios, but it's not as common for investors to do that. But we have a couple more questions. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I want to make sure we get to them. Ciara, some folks want to know about when you got sort of friends or family who were like, no, don't do it, or didn't believe in your vision. How did you power through?
Believe it or not, when I wanted to quit my job, and I wanted to quit my job because I wanted to work full time, but I also genuinely did not enjoy that job. And I actually have a great relationship with my bosses there, but I hated the work and I didn't think I was good at it. So combined, I was miserable every day. And so I would talk to my mom and my sister about it, and they're like, well, just wait until you find something else. And I was like, I don't think y'all are hearing me. I'm miserable. And whether I stop this job to work for myself full time, which is what I'm leaning towards, or just take a break until I find something else, I am leaving. So sometimes you just have to like tell people to shut up and mind their business. Thank you for the advice, but like I'm gonna do what I think is best for me, and then like just do it anyway. But after I told them like I don't think y'all are hearing me, I'm miserable, then they were on board instead of like projecting their fears onto me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I want to make sure that I covered the sort of most important pieces that you both want to share with the audience today on the topic at hand, which is really how do we get more capital to communities, to women and to communities of color and who are doing entrepreneurial impact. And so, yeah, so I'd love to just, maybe I'll start with you, Noah, and just, any last remarks, ideas, big picture questions or visions or any thoughts that you want to share with the group.
Well, one, I mean, if you're already here and already thinking about this, if you're working on something, just do it. Like, just take the plunge. And especially if you're already connected to an institution like this or to people like Jill or Sarah, like, I mean, you just do it. You're already so lucky compared to so many people in the scope of humanity that like hurdles exist for everyone, but like just go for it. And then I actually have one small request, which is I think every time that we work with a founder who's, in the thick of building something meaningful, is there anything that this community can do to support you, Sarah? Is there anything, if somebody has an aunt who runs a salon, an aunt who runs a finance shop, right? Like, is there anything that the 30 people here might be able to help you with just to increase the surface area of your luck a little bit?
Question. There are a couple things that I'll be working on over the next couple weeks. I'm looking for high net worth individuals, so angels, super angels, small check writers, who are looking for somewhere to park capital. If they're impact specific, that's great, but if not, that's also okay. And then alternatively, I have a letter of intent that I'm going to start circulating with salons and Black-owned beauty supply stores. And I actually have a good list going of 400 around the country, and maybe like 40 of them are in California. But if someone knows someone that owns a beauty supply store, it might be easier to have that conversation to gauge interest and make some headway with preparing for our wholesale strategy next year.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And how can they reach you if people know such folks?
Oh, my email is ciara@rebundle.co. I'll put it in the chat.
Great. And Noah, where are you with the honor fund? And if we have an idea, how baked does the idea have to be before we reach out to you?
Not baked, but great, right? So honorsfund.com, and you can it takes, I think, an average person takes about 3.5 minutes to upload it. It's great if you have a 1-pager or a pitch, though. Like, we definitely need that level of baked. And, we've invested in 8 companies so far this year, probably double that next year, and really active. Honors Fund does focus on stuff that's software enabled to some extent, just as a small note. But just honorsfund.com, would love to see anything there.
Great. Terrific. Ciara, what would you like to leave the group with? Anything that we can learn from your experience, or some words of wisdom for those folks that want to follow in your footsteps and do something that's hard but worthwhile and follow their passion, or anything you want to share with us?
Yeah, only thing that comes to mind is I do feel extremely grateful for the resources in the community that that came out of my time at SC, and specifically in the MSSC program. So if you're worried about starting and then being left in the lurch by yourself, unlikely if you're coming out of SC, because of the additional support that's come out of the school. So at the very least, you have SE.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great note to end on. Thank you. Jill, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. What a wonderful panel. Thank you. Us on Instagram or Facebook, be sure to do, because we'll have upcoming events that we'll be having in the spring. So we'll have a few more Jacobson lecture series. And I want to do a quick shout out to Libby and Arthur and the family for really making this possible. And we love you, Libby. You're on. So kind of with that, yeah, thank you so much, Sara, Noah, Ciara. So great to see you all. And thank you all for coming and attending tonight's lecture series. Thank you.